Hello and welcome to Catholic Unscripted, episode 28. I'm Catherine Bennett.
I'm Mark Lambert.
I'm Gavin Ashenden.
We are back from France. We've had a lovely summer. In fact, I was there with the Lamberts. Anyone who follows us on Twitter will have seen our lovely photographs. And Gavin, you're in France now, I think, aren't you, at your Normandy retreat?
Sadly, without the Lamberts, so it's taking a certain amount of resilience and strength of character to survive. But I am here, and it's very good to be here. I get to pray here better and think here better. So I hope I'll demonstrate that today during the recording.
Struggling on. Well, during the summer, we have had lots of news about youth. There's been World Youth Day, and Gavin, you wrote about this for the Herald. You wrote about the Tuppernacles, so we're going to be spending a bit of time talking about that, about sacredness, restoring the sacred, which is a theme that came up as well when we've talked about that before many times. So World Youth Day, and also Mark was in Lourdes just before he came to see us in the south of France and can talk about his experience there and the young people there. So a particular focus on the youth, I think, would be good. And we also said, and if I've forgotten anything, mention it, but we wanted to talk about the very recent case of Lucy Letby, who was found guilty yesterday, as we're recording it. It was yesterday, of murdering 6 or 7 babies as a neonatal nurse and attempting to murder another number as well, and how she's been found the most prolific serial killer of children in living memory. And so we'd like to look at that, really. But we'll begin with World Youth Day. So what is World Youth Day, Mark? Where did it take place? Why did it begin? And then we'll go
Where
over
did
to
it go
Gavin.
wrong?
Yeah, where did it go? I was going to say, where did it go wrong? And then we'll go to Gavin for the Tuppernacles debacle.
Well, I think one of the interesting things about World Youth Day is that there's been lots of people talking about it as a result of what went on this year, and I suppose it's another sign of the division in the church that you've got people aligning on either side of the debate. Probably the polarizing factor being Pope Francis, which I think is really unfortunate. And I kind of said as much, that I don't think that this is the sort of thing that we should be doing with the papacy, is like that, sort of talking about World Youth Day as a success or a failure based on the person of the Pope, because the young people are going because of Jesus. They're going because of their faith, because of their Catholic faith. And for that reason, 1.5 million young people coming together, to celebrate their faith, to be closer to Jesus, is an extraordinary thing, matched in its extraordinariness by the fact that it wasn't covered on any of the world media, I don't think at all. When was the last time that there was such a enormous meeting of human beings, in one place? And yet we didn't hear anything about it at all in the mainstream media. They were reporting the Scout Jamboree in South Korea, which was 400,000 young people, but I didn't hear anything at all about the World Youth Day. It was something that was started, I think, by John Paul II, and John Paul II has got this sort of, when we look back now, it's kind of a cultic reputation. He really was the first rock star pope, I think, and we had a long papacy, and he was just a very magnetic character. So that he was the one who started it. I think it's every 3 years or every 4 years in a different part of the world that everyone gets together. So this one was in Portugal. And one of the interesting things that came out of it was that I think everyone that I've seen commentate on it has been, oh, well, I went to World Youth Day. It's interesting to see the people on the, that people, you might say, the more orthodox side of the church have been saying that they were at World Youth Day. So everyone has had an experience at World Youth Day, the more progressives and the more orthodox. But the more orthodox commentators, perhaps it was they see it as a step in their journey towards deeper holiness or a deeper connection with Jesus. And I think we were lining up, that you could see people lining up to take pot shots at World Youth Day, looking for opportunities, and that really worries me. That sort of thing. So I think, of course, there were things when you get that. I mean, my sons went to Poland. I think it was it might have been 8 years ago now. It might have been 12 years ago, but no, it must have been 8 because it was Pope Francis. So, and they had a really appalling time, I think, because it was really hot. They were in a field with 4 million kids or something, and it was, the toilets were a disaster, and the food, and that walk temp. So it wasn't a massively spiritual experience for them. And obviously the Pope, you're looking for this mystical rock starry figure in a white cassock, which it seems a bit cultish. I don't know. Do you know what I mean? It's not really what the faith is about. So there are some strange things, and whenever you get that amount of people together, you're going to have loads of problems, aren't you? With you're not going to be able to. It's going to be challenging to make it like a sacred experience. But from all accounts, when they had adoration with the Pope, and you had 1.5 million kids in a field all adoring the Blessed Sacrament with the Holy Father, in unity with the Holy Father. So I think that was a really, really positive thing. And then there are the inevitable problems that you're going to get. There was the sort of the attempts. I think the last few times, especially, there's been these attempts to be cool, with the putting on dances, like the priests or the nuns dancing, or there was a DJ priest at this one, and I suppose some of us are rolling our eyes and saying, is that really what what is it all about? What are we trying to do here? And it's an interesting phenomenon in church, because you always get this thing with the youth movement where it's the adults telling the children what they want. They're telling, oh, you want cake, don't you? Here's some more cake, and the kids are going, no, we don't cake. We want meat pudding, please. But no, you want cake. Here's some more cake. And I think that you can see that the movement at Chartres is a really good thing to juxtapose with what happens at World Youth Day, where there is reverence. And so that, cut to the chase, the whole thing is that, I mean, Gavin, you can speak to this, but and I think it's interesting, your journey towards that understanding was what really moved me in the bit that you wrote about it, where you were saying that you had this idea of the humble chalice of the carpenter, sort of Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade sort of idea of what, and it was sort of understanding as your understanding of the real presence develops, then you come to this point where you think, actually, we want to give as much reverence, and as we want to treat the Lord with as much reverence as we can. And the way that we treat the Lord is born of that closeness, or that desire to be close to him. And that's why we go to Holy Communion. And when we go to Holy Communion, it's important that we prepare ourselves as it is when we go to all the sacraments. And these are all elements of worship that we see problems with today. I was funny because I was thinking about it earlier about, before Vatican II, they used to have men's sodality and women's sodality once a month. You go to Holy Communion, and there was the Pope said, like, we want people to come to Holy Communion more regularly, and you can really understand that it's that closeness. They're trying to bring about a closeness to the sacrament, and to think that the grace will abound even more if they. But what actually happens is people treat it like it isn't anything special. Unfortunately, that seems to be what's happened. And so we're always in that, there's always that difficult balance to be met between the increase in our devotion and the everydayness of things, which is sort of an interesting juxtaposition. And I think that's what you see at World Youth Day. You see all these millions of kids, and they've all come there because of Jesus. They've all come there because of their faith, and these are really, really positive things. But as a result of that, then the things that we should treat sacred, do they get mistreated? I don't know. What was your take on it all?
Yeah, Gavin, tell us about the piece you wrote about the so-called Tuppernacles, where Jesus was put into Tupperware, in a sort of Tupperware tabernacle. Because as Mark said, that was a brilliant piece, and you can find that on the Herald website.
That's very kind of you. Two things have happened to me since I became a Catholic, and they both really surprised me a lot. And they both seem to me to have grown organically and pneumatically rather than being things that I've adopted consciously. The first is that I can't bear to receive Jesus in my hands. I have to receive him on the tongue, if I possibly can. And I've been very surprised at how, well, I feel dirty taking him in my hands. And it's a very odd feeling, as though there's something wrong. Maybe I'm undressed or I haven't washed or something. But to receive him in my hands feels awful, and I need to take him on my tongue. And this isn't something I've thought myself into. It's just happened as I've grown more Catholic in my understanding of the Eucharist. And the other thing that's happened is I used to very much think that it was a good idea to have the most humble possible chalice and paten, and clay and wood were all close to the carpenter and part of the poverty of the incarnation, and so on. And since my understanding of Eucharistic miracles, it seems to me that only the best, the very, very, very best, is possible to reflect this incredible miracle of the transformation, transubstantiation. So that these are things I think that I'd probably call a development of a Catholic mind, since I didn't have them as a Catholic. And the reason I bring them in now is because I found myself looking at a tweet by an American girl of 22 whose experience of World Youth Day was that the opening mass was brilliant. A lot of good things happened. She was glad to be there. As Mark said, 1.5 million. Wow, that's incredible. Who else can do that? Catholics can. Fantastic. But there were a couple of things that obviously they're not traumatic, they're not terrible. But one was the DJ who wanted to play it's not ghetto music, is it? Not festival music. There's a proper word, and I don't know what it is. Anyway, I'm a musician, and I the moment I hear a mechanical, aggressive beat, I freak out spiritually, because I think it's a bit like it's a sign that we're celebrating the animal, and polyphony is the angel. And so as soon as I hear techno music, I just freak and freeze and think, no, it's the enemy. It's something that's designed to evoke the animalistic in us. And I mean, I was watching a TikTok video. There's about 25 kids or something. They're hanging around. Suddenly this techno beat started, and they began to move and writhe animalistically and over and hypersexually, almost as if someone had flicked a switch. And I thought, this is a form of social and aesthetic conditioning. Anyway, be that it may, what she was saying was, if we want techno music, we know where to get it. When we worship as Catholics, we want something else. We want Palestrina, we want beauty, we want polyphony. So why on earth the authorities patronize us and think they're giving us a DJ who gets down with the kids and produces is going to bring us closer to Jesus? Well, okay, you can argue about that. Some kids won't get it, and it'll look like it's a matter of taste. But I think she's right. I remember Brother Roger of Taizé insisting that quiet, gentle Baroque music was played before the liturgy in Taizé. And, you'd have 7,000 kids there sitting, trying to be quiet and still, never, ever having been quiet and still before, and experiencing 20 minutes of complete silence in the Taizé liturgies. But always the preparation was a particular style of music. And initially I thought, this is just Roger's taste. But I then began to get a sense that actually there is something very beautiful about that form of Western culture. It was where the polyphony of the music communicates as much goodness and holiness as techno beat does animalistic instinct. Anyway, be that as it may, she was going back on the last night, and she was passing some places where the Blessed Sacrament was being stored in these Tupperware boxes with just nothing there. And she and her friends said, this is terrible. And they canceled their plans for the evening, and they got on social media and they organized a rota in reparation for the disrespect to Jesus. So then some people said, oh, but look, this is pragmatic. There's 1.5 million. Grow up, be realistic. What can they do? Except until you see what happened at Chartres, where they also had, okay, not 1.5, but they had a lot of people. And there, the reserved sacrament was done in the most beautiful. You can do it if you believe it. And if you have a sense that that's what you're dealing with, it's just, the problem was not criticizing for lack of taste or for different values, but it's quite clear that some of the people organizing the worship didn't believe in the Mass, or they wouldn't have used Tupperware, and worse than Tupperware boxes. They had the hosts in cellophane wrapped plastic basins that quite clearly were simply and utterly utilitarian. You'd have thought twice before putting your picnic in it, let alone consecrated hosts. So the reason
on that
this
point,
matters,
Gavin,
yeah,
that's a really interesting point, because it's which you put your finger on. It's Eucharistic coherence, which is what the American bishops have been trying to promote, isn't it? And exactly as you say, it's like, how do we analyze that? Do we say that it's because different people in the church understand the Blessed Sacrament in a different way? And if that's the case, then surely we need more teaching on the Blessed Sacrament, because if it really is the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus, then those children who were devastated to see it being disrespected in that way are right, aren't they? And then what are we sending our children to if they're being, if they're sort of in an environment where you would hope that they were being encouraged in the faith, not discouraged in the faith? There's a lot of questions.
What I think it is people who want to say, well, Jesus was a humble carpenter and met people at the lowest point, and wasn't into airs and graces, and wouldn't have been palaces but in stables, and humility. And I think I know a priest many years ago who needs our prayers. We pray for him a lot. He put Jesus in the filing cabinet in a place where I worked, and I was really upset about this. And he told me I shouldn't be upset because Jesus wouldn't mind where he is. And I think that it's so wrong-headed. It's so sad that was a Catholic priest. But I think where we can see this right balance is in the life of St. John Vianney, who I wrote about for I think it was July's Herald edition, but of the magazine. So I visited St. John Vianney's tomb at Ars in France. And as you know, St. John Vianney is the patron saint of priests. And this tiny little man, this lovely little faithful priest, who by worldly standards was so insignificant. He struggled at seminary. He was intellectually not considered as to meet the standards. He was tiny, smaller than me, is 5'2" or something, and he spent as much as 16 hours a day in confession, hearing confessions. And when you go to visit his house in Ars, his house is sitting next to the church, which is now a basilica, this beautiful building that began as this tiny little parish church. And his house is so simple, and it's just kept as it was. And he's known, if you see images of him, of a black sort of vestment and a white cassock or something, whatever the right word is. Very, very simple. But whenever he wanted to purchase vestments for saying Mass, they were the most ornate, beautifully embroidered gold, the finest material, the most expensive you could buy, because he wanted to point to glorify God. So he, in his own life and his own home, everything was very humble, very simple. He didn't have anything that showed that was ostentatious about himself, but anything that related to serving God and to his role as priest was all beautiful, ornate, carefully chosen. And he said it's because, I want to give greater splendor and glory to God. So I think there's a misunderstanding there when we say, well, which I've said, and you may disagree, is at the root of this is oh, well, Jesus is with the lowest of the low, and so to think that that's an argument to say shove him in a filing cabinet or a Tupperware box it doesn't make any sense to me. But do you think that's at the root of it?
I do. It's a false understanding based on an unwillingness to appreciate the power of holiness. We know that the Catholic Church is very good at doing this. Only the best is good enough. So we have produced the most beautiful buildings that make people take a breath with awe when they see them. Only the best of music is good enough. Listen to Catholic polyphony of the 16th century, and you get blown away by it. Only the best is good enough theologically and liturgically, just like the Curé d'Ars said. And the test of whether we've got this right is whether or not we give Jesus the best and we settle for the not best for ourselves. And so the problem with the people who are producing techno music and putting Jesus in Tupperware or filing cabinets is it's a sign they've lost their understanding of what holiness is and what an incredible miracle the Mass is and the incarnation itself. And that's what the Catholic mind does. The Catholic mind produces the most beautiful buildings, the most beautiful music, the most awesome response to holiness. And you don't find it. It's not part of being a Protestant. Being Protestant is much more functional, much more good. There are lots of good things about being a Protestant, but they're illiterate in these. It's all about being tone deaf almost. And so one of this woman, Savannah, moved me very much because this picture of her kneeling in front of the Tupperware boxes, making reparation. There was a beauty about it. You couldn't have staged it. I thought somebody had almost, the studio had put it together. But there was something about the light and the bodies and the position. You could see the holiness in the picture. And all it was some kids who loved Jesus who were deeply upset at the disrespect that grown-ups had shown in the way in which they'd prepared for the Mass. So that's a lesson for the church today. And as always, a little child shall lead them. It takes kids to tell the grown-ups where they've gone wrong sometimes.
That's really interesting. And I think that a similar thing happened at the last World Youth Day in Panama as well, where there was like a lot of images went out of people passing the host around. I don't know if you saw that at the last one. So they were like, someone with a ciborium would pass it to someone else. And the excuses that have been made have been like, oh, you just can't distribute the Blessed Sacrament reverently well, then don't do it. It's kind of thing like, don't do it, because this is the greatest gift. If we don't understand that the Blessed Sacrament is the greatest gift imaginable, that God is truly present for us in the Blessed Sacrament, if we don't treat that as what it is, then what's the point? There's no point in being a Catholic at all. So,
Yeah.
My greatest horrors as an Anglican priest, once I'd encountered the Buenos Aires miracle of 94, and my mind was changed, and I said, okay, in the Catholic Mass, it happens. I longed for Jesus to do a miracle in the Masses I was involved with in Anglican. I asked him to do this a special favor. I don't know if he did. I suspect he didn't, because he's a God of order and promise. But I remember, because you give out the Eucharist to people kneeling, you can see something of the state of their souls from their body language, almost like one could see the state of the soul of these young people as they knelt in reparation in this picture. And you could see they didn't know what they were getting. The way in which they received the host. This is just Anglicans I'm talking about. They've got an excuse, they're completely muddled. They've no idea. And anyway, it's all hollow. It's all Zwinglian, it's whatever you want it to be, is Anglican teaching in the prayer book. So it's not their fault, but the moment you see the way they come to it, oh, well, all right. It's blasphemy, breaks your heart. And once you realize what Jesus is doing and how he's giving himself to the hungry soul in the Eucharist.
Yeah, I think that's it. And it really speaks to the importance of us modeling. It's not just about the words we use, but it's how we model what it is that we are living, what we're participating in, who Christ is, who Jesus is. I wear a mantilla at church. Often, sometimes I forget it or it gets blown away in Chicago. But I wear a mantilla and receive, like you, Gavin and Mark, I know, on the tongue, because I think, and I haven't always, but I think once you do really sort of understand what's happening, it's impossible not to, in fact. And my children are the same, and they're kids. They're not even old teens, they're young teens. We were at a church once, one summer holiday, and so it was an unfamiliar parish, and the priest said, and I'm not sure why, it wasn't during COVID, if you come up to communion, you can only receive in your hands, you mustn't receive on the tongue. And of course my children are used to receiving on the tongue, and it was a really difficult one. But in the moment, my son turned to me and said, "What shall I do?" And I said, "Receive in your hands." The reason I did is because I felt this is also a question of authority, and I don't want to undermine the authority of the priest. And I said, we don't know the reason why he's asked this, but the fact that my son didn't just not care less. So I do think it's important that we model what's going on, what's happening at Mass, and not just be casual about it. Because I think there's this real casual nature has just crept in. I say crept in as if I knew life before. In fact, I didn't. This has always been the way since I was young, born in the mid-70s. But it's coming to appreciate what's happening, and that we are really receiving body, blood, soul, and divinity of our Lord Jesus Christ. My goodness, when you say it out loud, you think, how can we not be just on our knees and in absolute adoration of and thankfulness? Yeah.
Well, that's the important thing. And it is. I think it's important to say that it is. It's canonically licit for people to receive on the hand.
Yeah.
But what you tend to find is, so I wouldn't, if anyone's listening to this and they're thinking, oh no, I receive on the hand, it's like that's how they've been taught to receive. So, there's nothing wrong with that in terms of what the church teaches.
No.
But I think as your faith develops and you come to understand it was the practice of the church to always receive kneeling and on the tongue, out of reverence. And it's in John's Gospel as well that's the way that the apostles received at the Last Supper. And so there's this thing about one of the church fathers saying, make a throne with your hands. But if you read further into that letter, it's nothing to do with receiving Holy Communion on the hand. It's reserving the Blessed Sacrament for then taking it to someone who's sick. So the practice in the church has always been to receive on the tongue. And it is pedagogical. If you receive in that way, you're teaching people that there's something extremely important going on. So I think there's that element to it as well. And it is one of those areas where, unfortunately, church teaching has become kind of fractured into a couple of directions, and it's a real area of polemics within the church where people who receive on the hand will get really upset if you say, well, receive on the tongue, the only proper way to receive is on the tongue. But it is, I would say, so I don't want to upset anyone. That's why I'm saying, it's licit. But exactly, as it's interesting that the three of us independently have all come to that decision. I mean, it was a really difficult one. I was received on the tongue for a long while after I'd studied, but and sort of come to an understanding. Oh wow, what am I saying amen to?
Yeah.
But then I'd made this decision to kneel at Holy Communion, which was really a painful one because I'm a 6'4" or whatever. I was like, oh no, I'm making an idiot of myself, and you don't want to draw attention to yourself, and you don't want to. But what I want to do is I want to be with Jesus in that moment, and that's more important, that I kneel down and say, Amen, this is my Lord and my God, than anything else. And I think if that's your focus, that and it's interesting that people with deep faith, they do tend to do that. They move in that direction, and I think that's really interesting in and of itself, isn't it?
Yeah.
There was that wonderful. Who was the author who wrote that excoriating piece on Twitter about all I've ever known have been Eucharistic ministers in skinny pants, Skojak. So it was, and then he was comparing people clergy who produced lame, thin, heterodox sermons for which they dashed out into the congregation to give dramatic effect, but you couldn't count on them to elevate the host for more than half a second. And it was that they couldn't be counted on to elevate the host because some of they've stopped believing in it. They believed in entertainment and in themselves and in a kind of populism, but they stopped believing in the miracle of the Mass. It's that moment of elevation, and as you say, Mark, my Lord and my God, on your knees, open your mouth. You're right. It's up to people to receive Jesus in the way that seems good for them and their soul. Quite right. For me and my soul, it seems good to kneel, cross myself, and receive on the tongue.
Yeah, this brings us to just another question on this. I want to stick with World Youth Day, and to just ask about this idea of bringing young people in and what appeals to young people. I was at an event, a Catholic event, with many old people, mostly men, recently. I was certainly the youngest there by decades rather than years, and I'm not that young. And they were standing around chatting and saying, oh, my grandchildren don't go to Mass and the children don't go to Mass, and we need to bring them back, and sharing their ideas. And as the youngest there, I was saying, well, I don't know if that's really the right idea. They were talking about football matches and youth clubs and discos.
Pizza.
And pizza and all the rest of it. But what was interesting was that as the youngest person there, they weren't consulting me and saying, what do you think? And the fact that I have 5 children and work in schools with young people. And when I suggested some different ideas, they looked stunned. They couldn't believe. They thought, what, this is going to attract young people? So what do you think we're doing wrong in terms of trying to appeal to the youth?
Mark? Do you want me to go?
Yeah.
So obviously I've got 5 kids and worked with young people in the church for years and years and years, and this is the classic thing. I was in the youth service myself and met my wife, sort of in that environment. And it's interesting. I was in Lourdes, as you said, a couple of weeks ago, with the diocese, and which was a positive experience. It was it was really interesting, but it was great, and I felt very welcomed, and I was really glad that the diocese treated me that way. It was really nice, because you don't know, do you? Sometimes it can go your way. And I spent a lot of time with the clergy and one thing and another. And what was interesting was that the youth element of the Mass and everything was the same as it was, in 1985, or if you could go back, we were singing the same songs that we used to sing in 1979, or, and it's that same element. And what really struck me, and I put in my Catholic Herald article that I wrote about Lourdes, was that you've got all these clergy and the bishop, right, in the Rosary Basilica in Lourdes. I don't know if you've been. It's absolutely beautiful, stunning, with all the all the terms of praise for our Blessed Mother all around the pillars. Seat of wisdom, all this beautiful. It's lovely, really, really lovely, and huge, beautiful mosaics. And you've got the I can't remember how many priests there were, and deacons, but say there was 20 priests, perhaps 30, and so you can imagine at the great Amen, that doxology before then, they all solemnly intone, through him and with him and in him, and it's just such a crescendo, isn't it, that we are then in the liturgy called to respond with our great art, Amen, and instead of that, what do you get? Ding 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 ding. It's jazz hands, and it was stark. The contrast is stark, and it's the same thing. And I think it's not that when we were kids we loved it, right? We would go and we would take part in it, and we thought, did we learn anything from it? No. Are any of those kids still in the youth service? Any of my any of the young people that I was with, are they practicing Catholics? not many.
Mm.
I think if you counted them, the people that we know, it didn't deepen their faith. It didn't draw them into Christ. It hasn't built a relationship with our Lord. I'd be not in very, very few cases have people gone on, and where they have gone on, they've gone in a different direction. They haven't carried on in that direction. And despite the fact that the numbers dwindle every year, despite the fact that we know children are falling away from the faith, all of our dioceses are still doing this same cake that, Gavin and I were talking before we started recording about the way I always say it is, it's like you say, the old people, which is us now to some extent, but going, you want cake, don't you? Yeah, here's some cake. And the kids are going, have you got any potatoes or beef? No, what you want is cake. And we keep giving them this frivolous nonsense. And what they want to do is deepen their faith and their relationship with our Lord. And that's interestingly what you see at Chartres. What they want is to be initiated into the mystery. What they want is a mystagogical experience at Mass. And we don't do that. We make it frivolous. And that's really interesting. And then the priest, go on. Well, the priest was saying to me, "Oh, it's such a like loads of people were running off with the Eucharist. At one point, the bishop ran down the aisle. God love him. Yeah. I was really impressed that he did. That he was, that's their job to be custodian of the sacraments. But in the pub or in the hotel afterwards, the priest was saying to me, "Oh, it's such a shame that the lady you don't." And I was like, "But who's teaching them? What are we teaching them? We're teaching them. Oh man, it's a load of rubbish. I'm sorry."
Well, what we're doing is,
how are they supposed to?
What we're doing is we're trying to entertain them, and because we think we're entertaining them with Christian culture, that must make the entertainment good. The entertainment is not what's required. I think Lewis is the best example of that with his Narnia stories. What he does in the Narnia stories is produce children with immense moral and imaginative challenges to get in touch with a reality that lies behind what they have, that instinctively sometimes they know best about. I'm slightly a Platonist at times, thinking that children might even come in with better memories of eternity and forget it as they grow up. But maybe there's a Christian version of that, which is not they've forgotten it, but their antennae are better tuned than the dulled antennae of adults. And our job is not to entertain children, but introduce them into this miraculous other dimension of reality. And I think they're perfectly capable of getting hold of it. It's mystery, it's beauty, it's adoration. I mean, for myself, I learned it first of all, not at evangelical youth camps, but in the crypt of Canterbury Cathedral. So at the age of 12, I went in there because I thought I might be a Christian. I was at school there, and there at 7 o'clock on a Sunday morning in the candled dark, we sung Plainsong. It was quite Catholic, really. And I developed a taste for the unbelievably wonderful mystery of God in the darkness and the beauty. You don't get that with strumming guitars and being entertained.
Yeah. I'm so glad I asked you both, because you've both given such beautiful answers. Just really lovely to hear words initiated into the mystery. I love that, Mark. They want to be initiated into the mystery, and our job is not to entertain them. That's not the purpose. It's looking at what is the purpose of Mass. What's the purpose of our lives? What's the lens through which we see ourselves and our relationship to our Creator and to one another. It's the end is not entertainment, and as long as we say the end is entertainment, we're always going to say let's bring in guitars and drums and jazz hands and all the rest of it. But I think what not just young people, but all people recognize, whether they like it or not. This is that you can't interview people. You can't do a study and say we've asked 100 people and 80 people want guitars, so therefore let's have them, because you might not even know what it is you yearn for. And I think my experience with young people is that they just recognize authenticity, truth, beauty, goodness. They just know this. They just recognize it, and all you have to do is present them with it. Authenticity, and actually bringing them
the word.
getting them to the sacraments, plain and simple. When I worked many years ago in a youth place, there was a large group of young people who went off site somewhere else, and I think I might have told you this before. I've certainly told you too. I might have said it here. I was tasked with entertaining the so-called naughty children who had been left behind, and these weren't particularly, they didn't really know much about the mass. They didn't know what a rosary was, and I was told, why don't you do colouring in and origami? And I thought, well, I think what I'll do is take them to the chapel, and once we've done a bit of origami, and we'll say the rosary, and I'll tell them. This was a Catholic youth place, so there was a chapel there, and there were about 7 or 8 of them, rowdy lads, kicking and wanting to go outside, kick around, kick a ball, kick each other, and they sat down first of all, shirts untucked, legs all over the place, rolling their eyes. And I said, do you know about the rosary? Oh yeah, I've heard about it. Well, maybe my granny mentioned it or something. Here's a set of rosary beads. And I talked to them about I talked to them about what the rosary was. And we were in the chapel. So we were in the chapel with our Lord, and a couple of candles, no music, nothing, just peace, actually. And there's so much noise in the world, so much vying for their attention. So just to be still and at peace. And I said about some of the miracles associated with the rosary as well. And I said, and this is how we pray. And I'd had printed cards of how to pray the rosary. And I said, you don't have to say anything, but we would pray like this. And I will lead, and then you follow, and then we can switch. One of you could lead a decade of the rosary. So I began, and they were not that. They were sort of intrigued a little bit, but still slightly mucking around. And as we went on, again, that the rhythm, and as we spoke about the life of Christ, which of course Our Lady always draws people to her Son. That's it, isn't it? We spoke about each mystery and the life of Jesus. And by the end of the second, the third mystery, they wanted to lead the rosary. They wanted to lead a mystery. And when we finished the Hail, Holy Queen. We just stopped, said Amen. And they didn't all jump up and walk out. There was just a stillness. And funnily enough, after that, every one of them said to me, Miss, have you got any of those beads? And I said, yeah, I have actually. And I gave them all a set of rosary beads. And occasionally after that, they would come to me if they saw me, said, I'm praying those beads at home. They got into it. They said, I like this rosary. And this, I thought that's it, that I didn't get the CD player out and play some jazzy music or whatever, because it isn't me. That's the thing. It's not what I'm doing. It's just bringing them before God, and it's praying, and it's having that really believing. Is it Pope John Paul II, when we were in Chicago, I think we were saying, when there was a Eucharistic, what was it? What was that at the seminary at Mundelein, where they had adoration in that massive tower? They brought
like a revival, wasn't it?
Yeah, like a Eucharistic revival. And John Paul II said, you don't have to meet them where they are. You don't have to try and bring young people in by doing the football and the dancing and the discos and all the stuff that they're getting anyway elsewhere in the world. All you have to do is show them Jesus, is bring them to what's true and what's good and what's beautiful, and he will bring them if that's what you're presenting. But it has to be that authentic, it has to be authentic. That's it. So yeah, I don't think what sometimes sadly well-intentioned doesn't seem to be working, and in fact I think it does turn people away, because why? It's not something they can't get elsewhere. So there's a song, a guitar, get that down the youth club or somewhere else.
Well, it is exactly what you said. It's authenticity, and I think kids recognise that it's not authentic. That you're distracting them with stuff that and it's always like I'm trying to think now. What was it? It was a Family Guy or something where he said there's this line in it where there was like, you do know that Christian music is not helping Christianity or music. Like Christian rock music isn't rock music, and it isn't Christian, and it's just everything bad. It's just all of it is bad. And kids, of course, have got they've got a real sense of that, haven't they? You know, they recognise it.
Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
adults have too. There's a kind of what you might call a semiotic incoherence. I was reminded of it by that not very impressive woman who's a Bishop of Derby, a lady bishop, who said, you know, it'll be fine on Sunday not to go to church or to change the time of your divine worship so that you can support the lions. And as if Jesus
Lionesses,
suddenly,
Gavin.
Lionesses, sorry.
Of course.
Thank you. Of course.
Bigger.
But the sign it sends out is bigger, yes. The sign it sends out is the lionesses are more important than Jesus. They're more important than worship. They're more important than the sacrament. They're more important than the church, and they're not remotely as important as any of these things. And it's just this notion of somehow the church is being nice. It's accumulating moral virtue by being nice, by putting itself at the back of a queue of values. Whereas anybody, well, I kind of lost for words really, because the idea that somehow a football match of any kind, world final, takes precedence over you kneeling before the living God.
Like pandering to the culture thing, isn't it? That the church seems to have got into the habit of saying, look, everyone, we go shopping and we like football and everything, you know, so come to church because we like the same things as, you know, what a load of rubbish. That's not why people go to church, is it? And that's what you know, it's interesting that you said about the colouring in, Catherine, because that's one of my memories as a kid, you know, growing up was like, well, hang on a minute, they're talking, 1 minute they're saying that this is about how to make a collage out of, you know, what the hell has that got to do with anything? And I think that that's where we lose the plot. If we're in terms of catechesis, and exactly as you say, what works, what's always worked, what's worked for 2,000 years. And that is, if we like, but to do it, you've got to believe that it's true. And, you know, I know the guy who's in charge of it for our diocese at the moment doesn't believe in after, you know, he's quite openly doesn't believe in after things that the church teaches. So how on earth is he going to communicate that to the children?
One of my earliest experiences as a 9-year-old, I was in the choir at St Mary's Anglican Church in Wimbledon, and I was in the West Gallery, and the vicar and his curate came in. And unlike normal liturgy, they went to the altar and they began to walk around it, and they walked around it casually. Instead of processing and walking with respect, they kind of bumbled up to it. And I was seized with, I don't know where I got this from, I was seized with a horror. And I wanted to shout out to them from the gallery, be careful, you'll be struck by lightning. You can't approach the altar like that. What are you doing? What are you doing? Stop it. Of course, I didn't shout out because I was a kid and I was 9, and I didn't think I had any right to tell these grown-ups how to manage in their own church. But I knew, but they didn't know. And I mean, I think I put that down to my earliest instinctive understandings of holiness. I mean, you know, they read the Bible to us in our assemblies, and I remember the boys being eaten by the bear. I remember the man reaching out to, wasn't a priest, to steady the Ark of the Covenant and being struck dead. I remember Moses being told to take off his shoes because it was holy ground. How could these men stumble around when they'd been telling us it was holy ground, and suddenly it wasn't anymore? It was like they didn't believe, and as a child, it shocked me.
That's brilliant. And I totally share that as well, that it's like, it's holy when they want it to be. And of course, holy means set apart. So if something is set apart, then it's set apart, isn't it? And how can it be, you know, it's like a magic trick, isn't it? It's like the bloke behind the curtain in The Wizard of Oz. They sort of, by doing that, they're saying, you know, oh, don't look at the bloke behind the curtain. And and children latch on to this stuff. And I just think that that's the whole point of our faith. If it's inauthentic, children recognise that, you know, a million miles away. So we've got. I think it's easy. We just got to We just got to be, you know, open and honest about what it is that we're trying to do, and not try and dress it up in pretty clothes or kids' music or anything like that. I think that's a complete red herring.
Yeah. Agree. We're so very blessed though, aren't we? As we're speaking, I'm thinking we're so blessed to have the gift of faith. You know, I see people I love who don't have it, and I long for them to. And I remember a time I didn't. And I think we only have to ask. I really think we only have to, there has to be a little crack in the door, and then God will do the work, but he won't ever force himself. It's always a free choice. But so we've been open at various points in our lives, have been open and receptive and wanted to have a relationship with God and to let him love us. And we love him. But it's really sad to see people who can't let God love them. And so I think I'm just so thankful to have that gift of faith, and just pray for those who haven't yet encountered Christ and can let him love them. But yes, I think that authenticity is absolutely crucial. That's it.
Definitely.
Lucy Letby?
Yeah. Well,
Lucy Letby.
You're right. I think you're right.
Sorry.
Oh yeah, we're going to move on. Right.
No, it's just you. I think there's a glitch. There's a delay. No, it's not that. It's just there was my whole screen delayed, and I don't know if it's my Wi-Fi or what. But anyway, sorry. Yes, go on.
I wasn't sure if you were going to wrap up the whole program, but if you did, I thought it would be worth spending 2 minutes on the killer nurse.
We can move on to the killer nurse if you yeah, sure.
No, I wasn't trying to get you to move on. I was trying to. I thought you might be about to stop, because I don't know how long we've gone on for, but we've talked for quite a while. I was wondering if we would run out of time yet. But before we finish, I'd like to talk about the killer nurse.
We'll do a Matt Fradd and settle in for 2 or 3 hours. Get the cigars and the whiskey. The killer nurse, of course. We said we would speak about Lucy Letby. So, as I said, she's been charged for killing these babies. And what I've found, I was saying to you, wasn't I, Mark, yesterday, what I find difficult and very uncomfortable and incoherent is how the obvious horror of what she's done, and how everybody can see how horrific and evil it is, and yet we don't seem as a culture to be able to see that same horror or have that same recognition of evil, as we abort babies in the womb, as we kill infants. And from even if anything, there's calls to try and increase the time limit, in some cases up to birth. So it's very, very hard to see there's no moral difference, and yet people seem unable to see it. So what do we make of that, Mark?
Well, quick plug: March for Life, 2nd of September in London. If you go online and search for March for Life UK, come along. There'll be literally thousands of all different denominations of Christians marching, and Muslims as well, actually, and some of nothing. But come along and support the cause. And it's a great day out. Don't worry about bringing your kids, because it's very kid friendly, and you'll love it. So check it out online before you come. This is the big problem, isn't it? And it's about our understanding of morality. Where does our understanding? One of my kids said to me, John said to me, obviously, said to me a couple of weeks ago, where does morality come from? Where do we get our morality from? And we had a really interesting discussion about, I was saying, well, where do you think it comes from? And he was going, oh, well, politicians, or, and so we were sort of just gently guiding him through the way that that some things are true and some things are subjective. And this is one of those things, isn't it, where you would really think that their public conscience would be, killing an innocent child how could that possibly be right? And yet somehow we've been deceived into thinking that it is morally right. So exactly as you, that was the first thing when I was watching this report on this Lucy Letby, the first thing that came to my mind was the disconsonance in the way that it's, what is the difference between killing an unborn child and killing a born child? And even in some places now they're talking about infanticide, aren't they? Killing newborn children. Like, what's the difference? It's not like the birth canal is some magical device that turns you into a person, after all, is it? Like on one side of it, you're disposable clump of cells, and on the other side of it, you're a sentient human being. So it doesn't really make any sense. In a society that has been pushing for the fact that it's okay to kill children for so long, how can we be surprised that there are individuals who think it's okay to kill children?
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's monstrous. It just seems, like an argument for the reality of evil, doesn't it? As a real thing. It's truly frightening that someone who is in charge of, and my wife is a paediatric nurse, so particularly at home, that it's the love and the attention and she goes over what you'd expect really to look after the children. She cared so much about them. To hear that there's someone acting in this way is just devastating to think that your children could be in the care of someone who wasn't looking after them.
There are two things I thought that contributed to more children dying than they should have done. There were the worship of the nice and pride. And the reason the worship of the nice came in was everyone said this woman was nice. And if she was nice, she couldn't possibly be evil. And this shows such a closed-minded secularism. If anything, the history of the world in the last 150 years should have told us that people do the most appallingly bad things, and they were nice. The Nazis were very cultured people, by the way. They really enjoyed Goethe and Beethoven and music and poetry, but they were filled with evil, despite the fact they were culturally nice. And this woman, who was very nice, they've been looking to try and find if she did it for some psychological reason, drawing attention to herself, control. But it looks as though it was simply evil. But because they have no sense of evil, they couldn't believe it was happening. And when it became clear that it might be happening after all, the next thing that stopped him was they didn't want to experience any reputational damage. So they threatened the doctors who were pointing the finger and saying, this has to be a murder. Someone's killing the children. They silenced them and threatened them with disciplinary procedures because they didn't want reputational damage at their institution. They wanted their careers and their professional pride more than they wanted to take care of the lives of the infants who were there. And these are two things that Christians are very powerful, very informed about. We're informed about the reality of evil. We don't believe in nice. We're not taken in by it. And we know that pride is a very dangerous thing. And one of the things that the present progressive cultural changes have done is to detoxify pride from the immediate association that it's a bad thing. Pride is a thoroughly bad thing. And the way that pride operated in this institution was one of the things that led to more children being murdered. So there are, as people have criticized Christians for being closed-minded and not having a real a capacity for reality, it turns out it's entirely the other way around. Christians are able to see what reality is like because we take on board the reality of evil. We don't worship the nice, and we don't believe in pride.
Mm. Very true.
Sorry, bit of a sermon. Anyway, thank you for letting me saying it. I've been struggling with the accounts of what's gone on and just felt so angry with these administrators earning hundreds of thousands of pounds a year and threatening doctors trying to save the lives of children with reputational damage in case their institution came in for any flack at all. It's just, that's it. That's also evil.
It's come out now. It's come out now, hasn't it, that there were nurses working with her who, it became a bit of a thing. Like if the alarm went off, they were saying, "Oh, is Lucy? Is she on tonight?" If a child crashed, like that everyone knew that this was going on, and I think that is
towards the end. Yeah.
That's often the case. Yeah, that's often the case, isn't it? That you've got a sense about these things, and if the nurses are working together, they know that there was a problem with one particular individual. And so the question then has to be, I would have thought for the authorities, that they've got to look at that institution and say, well, why wasn't it possible for that concern to be brought to the proper authority? Why wasn't
she was defended? She was defended
able to be voiced that concern.
She was defended by senior people who thought she was nice.
Senior.
What I think is just really awful is the blindness. It's just the blindness of it. It's like, you know, Helen Joyce, who spoke recently, and her interview was watched by many people, and you may have seen it. She's talking about transgender, and she said one of the big problems, which is that so many parents have supported their children, that even if they were to see now how bad it is, or how dangerous it is, or how wrong it is, they can't go back, because going back would mean saying, I, the person who loves them the most, who's here to protect them, have damaged them permanently. I, their parent. And that's too big a cost for them to be able to do that. And so they will push and push and push, no matter what their conscience is telling them. And I think she's right. And I think it's the blindness with abortion. Really, the facts on the ground, and anyone knows, if you're crushing, destroying, filling with acid, dismembering a baby just in the womb, in utero, at 24 weeks, 20 weeks, 21 weeks, 1 week, is still a baby, it's still a human being. If you're doing that, and you're doing that just no problem, off to work, home again, there is no moral difference. There's no moral difference between that and what Lucy Letby did. And that's a really tough thing to say, and people might be horrified by my saying that. But there's no moral difference. And yet the blindness of our being able to pay some people to do that, to pay others to advertise for those services, to criminalize people who pray to end this horror, this genocide of abortion, and then can say, look how awful it is, and criminalize and imprison, quite rightly, someone like Lucy Letby. That blindness is staggering.
There's a very frightening part of the gospel where Jesus says, you would have been guilty anyway, but by insisting that you can see when you can't, you makes you even more guilty on the last day. So these are very serious issues. And the fact is, of course, we all have our blindnesses. We all have our stupidities. We all have our fear of reality. But the point of being a Christian is to put ourselves in the hands of God and asking him to remake us day by day, and letting go of the things that incarcerate us in our own pride and our own blindnesses. And that's what the Holy Spirit does. He works on us. That's one of the reasons why it's important to be a Christian, because you can be set free from these things. And without Christ and the Holy Spirit, you don't get set free. You get blinder and more trapped.
Mm. Yeah, and we mustn't be afraid to be set free. Yes, go on, Mark. Sorry.
Well, it's fascinating the way that we've got this group of modern feminists as well, who are sort of stumbling across these answers, and the interconnectedness of all these dots, and sort of saying, Louise Perry, I was reading some stuff from her this week. It's like they're reading the catechism to you. They'd probably be horrified if they knew that. But
Mary Harrington as well. It's just incredible.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, there's a bit where she was saying, chastity, monogamy, all these things, they had a really good purpose in society. It's like, oh, really? And the way that we're dismantling all these things without any idea of what we're going to replace them with has enormous consequences for society. And intelligent people without any Christian belief are waking up to those realities. And one of the things is that interconnectedness between, like, the pill, where you've got sexual availability of women, and the fact that before that happened, women would have, naturally would be less likely to have a sexual relationship, because they understood the consequences, and the consequences were, you could lose your life. You could have if you went for a backstreet abortion or whatever, you could lose your life. And you might die in childbirth anyway. And so you need a man, you need to form a lasting monogamous relationship, because that has to be a relationship where you've got a partner to support you through these incredibly important key moments in your life, haven't you? So it's really interesting to see the way that people are piecing together all these things and recognizing, actually, there's something going on here. This is all a bit familiar, all this stuff. Where have we seen it before? And it's almost like their hatred of the patriarchy blinds them to seeing the good. I'm not saying that everything was perfect or that we haven't made steps in progress and I want everything to go back to the 1940s. It's none of those things. Can't we do both? Can't we say, look, this is yes, we learn and grow and develop. Let's take the good stuff, and move into the future with it,
Yeah, exactly. The reason it's, for me, it's always coherent. So the fullness of truth is always coherent. And so what these people are doing, these modern feminists, so-called, but not, I don't know their personal stories, but not seemingly Catholic, is they're just seeing the coherence of it. They're saying, actually, there's an incoherence here, and this is coherent. So that is what we'll find when we look at our faith, is that truth is always coherent. And actually, what we might have understood because we only saw a bit of it, a little piece of the jigsaw, it's a bit like reading a book, isn't it? You read a few pages, you don't read the whole story, and you decide, you've made your mind up, it's a horrible, violent book, but you haven't got to the end. If you only get a little piece of the puzzle, it's not enough. You have to say, well, I need the full picture, I need the full story to really understand. And it seems to me that these people are starting to see and starting to understand, and that the end of that is truth. The end of that is seeing that is our faith, isn't it? That's God. That's and that involves participation. It can't be theoretical. It has to be lived, and it has to be incarnational. And we have to receive. We talked about the Eucharist. We have to receive Jesus. We have to, if we have no life inside us. So that's the end. But it's this piecing together of little bits.
I think what I love particularly about it is, from a Catholic point of view, is that you're seeing people come to it from a reason. So, like you say, they might not have the fides bit, but they've got the ratio bit.
Yeah.
And they're saying, "Oh, look how coherent this is," and you just think, "Oh, for goodness sake," But it's wonderful to see that coherence brought out. And part of that, I have to say, is because we don't teach it very well. We're not very good at teaching it. So it's wonderful to see people passionate about bringing out those, the truths about marriage and like the importance of family and the importance of chastity and monogamy and all of these important truths.
And what's lovely is you say we don't teach it, and it's true, we haven't taught it well. But again, because it's true, we teach it because it's true. It's not true because we teach it. And so, yes, we should teach it because it's true. But if we fail, we have that capacity, our natural law, we have that capacity to see what's true. And then it further proves the truth of our faith, because that's why we teach what we do. That's why the church, Christ established, knowing that we need a Holy Mother Church, teaches as it does.
And it's a proof of all of that. That's what
proof of all of that. Yeah.
What I'm very clumsily trying to get at. I bet Gavin could say it better.
And me too.
But, that it is a truth. That truth is, it's inside the Catholic faith, and to see these people pulling it out, and recognizing it as a truth without the structure, which sometimes obfuscates that truth, because people, it becomes a barrier, because it's like, oh well, Christianity, that can't be true. And the reason that they've got that barrier there is because we've been so shockingly bad at proclaiming the gospel in an authentic way, because we're too busy colouring in pictures and going, come on kids, let's go and have a disco and some pizza. So there you go, we've managed to bring it all together there,
bring it full circle. I'm just glad you boys are letting me speak as a woman, feminism and all that. I sent you both.
What can we say?
I sent you both a little letter I got from a priest, just to wrap up. I thought it was lovely. This priest wrote to me a few years ago in America, and he'd done a really lovely homily on a pro-life homily. And he said to me in it, "We must respect God's authorship and authority over human life. Until we figure that out, I do not think we'll be able to really improve our culture. But one day the world will wake up from the madness it has fallen into and be in need of people like us to lead them back to God. Pray and keep watch. Our Lord is on the move." And I think that's beautiful. really beautiful. And I think he's right. That's the preeminent issue, isn't it? So that's why I think this is so important. God's authorship and authority over human life. And if we can get that as a starting point, then the jigsaw starts to piece together and we'll get the fullness of truth. So on that note,
well said.
Thank you. Right. Thanks for sticking with us. Lovely to be back together again. And we hope to see you next week. I'm Catherine Bennett.
I'm Mark Lambert. We all know Mrs. Bennett is in charge. You all know, everyone watching knows Mrs. Bennett keeps me and Gavin in order.
And I'm the very much kept in order Gavin Ashenden. God bless you. God keep you.
Thank you. Bye. Oh.